Should start seeing the participants pop in. Oh, here they come. 6, 9.
All right. Hello and
13,
welcome, everybody.
20. Wow. Yeah.
The floodgates open.
All right. Welcome, everybody that's joining. We'll get started in a few minutes. We're in chat, too. So if anybody feels like opening up the Zoom chat panel, and I'm not in chat. I'm in Q&A, but go to chat and change your to option to all panelists and attendees. If you feel like sharing where in the world you're located, I'll do it myself. We'd love to know. I'm in Wilmington, Delaware.
Cool. Michigan, Maryland, Montana.
Welcome, Maryland. Welcome, Shelby, Montana. And Montana's one of those states I've not been to yet, and I would like to go. Sure, it's beautiful. Welcome, Ontario.
Mm-hmm.
Grand Rapids. Went to University of Michigan. Northville, Michigan. I don't know where that is. I would hold up my hand and make you point, but I don't think that's going to work on the webinar.
Oh, we've got Bucharest, Romania here.
Oh, welcome, Romania. And
Excellent.
Welcome, Sewell, New Jersey. Grew up in Spring Valley, New York. So I don't think too far.
Oh, I see one New Hampshire in there. That's where I grew up. Some good Northeast.
Live free or die, John. Live free or die.
That's like such a great license plate, like slogan, but also has a lot of ominous, like spooky to it.
Listen, I as much as I love other states, it's a lot better than the Show Me State.
We got a lot of trees. We got a lot of grass.
That's Missouri, right? Yeah. The Empire State, Garden State. Although some people might argue with that, but I love New Jersey, so I say Garden State. I'm in Delaware, the first state. I guess somebody had to be.
I'm originally from Oklahoma, and we're just Oklahoma is okay. That's as far as
go
we
ahead.
Get.
You want to
really
sing it? You know you do.
It's one guy writes
you
one
learn to spell it from the song.
Oh yeah, we actually. So when I was growing up, we had to sing that song like every week.
It's a great song.
Goodness.
Maybe we'll end the webinar with the song. With my terrible voice.
A stirring rendition.
And your probably much better voice.
No.
All right, we still have a lot of people joining, so we are not going to kick this off until we see some slowdown in the participants. A lot of people are jumping on right now. So welcome, everybody. If you're just getting on, we're in chat right now. So open the chat panel, change your to option to all panelists and attendees, and let us know where in the world you're calling in from. We'd love to know. We promise we won't make fun of whatever town you live in, York, PA. We're not making fun of York, PA. Wilmington, Delaware here, pretty close. A friend of mine that works in York for a company called Dent Supply.
Or York Barbells.
Do they make barbells in York still?
Oh yeah, yeah. They have a big Olympic weightlifter.
Parsippany. Welcome, Parsippany.
That's incredible.
Belfast, Northern Ireland. There we go. First Northern Ireland attendee.
We had Quebecois.
Where is that?
Oh, Quebec, Canada. But I believe it's pronounced Quebecois. We'll have to forgive
I won't even try to pronounce anything in French correctly. I'll just leave it to those that speak the language.
Yeah, I took 3 years of German in high school and then went to Germany, and everybody wanted to speak English.
3 years.
I was like, no, I really want to try.
We're starting to slow down on the participants, so I think John, we can get that presentation up.
All right.
All right. So welcome everybody. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. There's the chat. Everybody should be in chat right now. Let us know what you do for a living. Let us know where in the world you're located. You can use that for whatever you want. If you have questions, though, do us a favor, open that Q&A panel and type in the questions. We'll try to keep a good eye on them. If we don't get to your questions during the webinar, if we have time at the end, we'll try to get to them. If not, somebody will reach out to you. So use the Q&A because we want to know what questions you have. And since we are going to be talking about cyber insurance, before I do the intros on the next slide, if anybody has cyber insurance or encourages your customers to buy cyber insurance, or you're considering cyber insurance, let us know in chat as well. We're just kind of curious what the penetration of cyber insurance is in the industry. All right, let's move forward, John. So welcome everybody. We have what we hope is going to be a lively and informative webinar for everyone today. We had a ton of people sign up. We have a ton of people on this webinar. I'll thank Huntress and Joe for that, because we never get quite that number of signups at our end, but we love to do these webinars with Huntress. We've done them before. They've been very popular. We're going to be talking today about responding to a data breach to provide damage control and limit liability. We think it's going to be informative, not only for you, but actually for us. I learned a lot just putting this webinar together.
Oh, definitely.
With the two gentlemen that I'm going to introduce right now, John Hammond, he's the senior security researcher over at Huntress, and he writes extensively about the kinds of things that we all worry about, and that's malware. He also has a very active YouTube channel, so hit up YouTube, Google his name. You should find his channel pretty easily. And he's got some great stuff on there. I like watching the videos he puts out.
Appreciate
Huntress,
that.
as you know, Huntress, as you know, provides managed breach detection to help you find threats which slip past antivirus. And John will tell you more about it later on. We also are very excited to have Joseph Brunsman here. He's from CPL Brokers. Joe is also in the security business, and will be providing his perspective from what I think is a relatively new area of security for most of us, and that's cyber insurance. Why you might strongly consider getting some for yourself and recommend that your customers get some too. So we'll be talking about a lot of cool things from the cyber insurance perspective. I'm David Gugick. I'm the VP of Product Management over at Msp 360. We're in the business of providing backup services to the MSP community, so you can protect your customers' data while leveraging the public clouds, leveraging public cloud storage. So let's kick this thing off. I'm going to turn it over to John, who's going to talk a little bit about the cyber kill chain, which sounds like a video game actually, but it's quite a bit more ominous and important maybe, and he'll tell you all about it now.
Cool. Well, hey, thank you for that super flattering introduction, David. Yeah, I kind of just want to kick things off and get everyone on the same page. Like, we're just going to kind of lay the foundation, kind of set the stage, get a smattering of some topics and concepts and ideas that we'll talk about and reference throughout the talk. So this will be kind of high level. When we say we're going to be talking about the cyber kill chain, some of you might know that from kind of Lockheed Martin and their, I guess, like 7-step, 7-phase example and kind of depiction of the cyber kill chain. I want to distill that down. I kind of want to boil it down and just take an abbreviated look at it, because when we're talking about responding to data breach, when we're talking about damage control and liability, we're talking about some incident, like when disaster strikes. So kind of fast forwarding a lot of this and having an abbreviated look at the cyber kill chain, we're talking about reconnaissance, first things first, right? The adversary, the bad guys, the threat actors, the hacker, they're doing their homework. They're doing hacker homework, right? They're looking at your organization, trying to see your online web presence. Do you have a website? What are your employees maybe in social networks? Can I kind of cyber stalk you on LinkedIn, on Facebook, do some open source intelligence gathering, that sort of thing? I tend to affectionately refer to that as hacker homework, right? When they're just trying to find out who you are and scheme and plan that attack, what they might end up doing leading up to the incident, leading up to the disaster. Then you've got delivery, right? When you're actually the hacker setting the trap, they're baiting someone with some phishing, maybe like an email spam malware that they're sending as part of an ad email campaign. That could be a malicious document, etc. Like, hey, Office document with macros enabled, whatever the case may be, just that concept and that idea, that delivery is going to lead into exploitation. Now the incident's actually on. Now you're breached, right? And how are we going to respond to this incident and this disaster? That's the hacker's prerogative. They want to now that they've broken in, they've exploited this vulnerability. Now they'll do whatever they might have actually meant to do all along. They might deploy ransomware. They might be doing, I don't know, crypto mining, trying to get some sweet Bitcoin, trying to hog all your CPU resources and put that to use, maybe finding some new cryptocurrency, or exfiltrating data, stealing potentially sensitive information, PII, selling that out on the dark web, whatever the case may be. Again, just that concept, just that idea. After the incident, once you've been compromised, the hacker is going to go with their post operations. They're going to do post exploitation and do whatever they really wanted to do. What we're going to zoom in on, though, is just that incident, that disaster. So we kind of, at least oftentimes at Huntress, we want to tell people, like, we got to change our mindset where we aren't having this thought, oh, hackers, they're going to go hack someone else. They're not going to touch us. Why would we care? We don't need to worry about it because, I mean, look, we're whatever mom and pop shop. We're kind of small. It's not like we're a high value target for some threat actors or adversaries. We need to get away from that mindset. We need to change our mindset and philosophy to assuming compromise. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, right? When we're going to be compromised. We should always kind of have this thought process that the enemy's already here. They're already inside our walls. We have to kind of work from that and through that. We need to change our mindset and assume we're already compromised so we can be better and smarter and faster and really get ahead of this thing before it happens. We want to be preemptive. And that's, I think, where we can lead right back to you, David, talking about preemptive preparation.
All right. Thanks, John. So I don't think I can overstate, when I talk about being prepared, the importance of planning and doing things like creating recovery plans for not only you internally as an MSP about how to get your systems up and running if there's some kind of breach, but for every one of your customers. And I know it's not something that most of us want to ever think about, that outcome, that terrible outcome that we've made great efforts to defend against. But like John said, it's not a matter of if for most of us, it's just a matter of when, especially with all the customers that many of you have out there. But it happens. So when it happens, it's important to know exactly how to get your customer up and running again. So things like what data needs to be restored, which servers are important, how will they be restored, and in what order. Assuming you've done the appropriate cleanup of whatever malware may be there that caused the problem in the first place. And this applies to disaster recovery as well, just, like a flood or, you're hit by an electrical strike or something like that, lost equipment. But on the malware side, assuming that's already cleared up, your customer is going to be looking for you to expedite the recovery process. And that's something you'll need to do. So writing that down and expediting that process is important because lost time is money, right? Excessive downtime not only costs your customer, but it could impact the customer relationship. How is your customer going to view you, the MSP, if they feel like you're taking too long or you don't look like exactly what needs to be done in order to get them up and running? So document everything. And I really mean everything. You can never have too detailed documentation. I do that myself with things like, internally at MSP 360 with our security incident response plan, and a different type of document that's designed for us to figure out how to get back from some kind of problem, who needs to be notified, who are the players involved, all the important information that we keep up to date every year. But even things like how to do my taxes, right? I keep extensive notes as tax laws change about how to repeat the process the following year in order to do it in expedited fashion. So document everything, make it a part of your onboarding process with your new customers. As you add new applications or infrastructure, you get new products in-house, make sure those procedures are updated, and review things, I would say, at least annually for most of your customers. So, and ensure they work. So testing is the last phase. Don't just write them down, just don't follow the directions from the vendors that tell you this is how you get a server up and running. This is how you're going to restore, in our side of the backup services business, how to restore entire folders of files. Do tests to make sure that you understand how the process works and that it works correctly for you. The good thing is that you'll be using a lot of the same software out there. So there'll be a lot of shared processes that'll be documented, but I think it's the finer points, the more customer specific recovery options that become really critical to know in advance and get documented. So Joe, I know you had some opinions about recovery, and so I want to let you chime in right now and tell everybody what you see from the insurance side.
Yeah, certainly. So, I do insurance both for MSPs proper on the tech E&O side, as well as the cyber insurance for their clients and really just clients across the US at this point. And I think backups, it's something that we all know about it. There's nothing, super duper fancy out there, but like people just mess it up all the time. And that really just leads to a lot of unnecessary pain on the back end. So, shockingly, a lot of times I'll talk to business owners and I'm asking them, this would be like, say, the clients of MSPs. I'm asking them, okay, what is the frequency of your backups? And they don't know. Or I'm like, okay, how long are you keeping those backups? Do you have just a basic, say, like 3-2-1 backup strategy? And they're not really sure. And that's bad for a couple of reasons. So talking about the clients, that's going to be bad for them because increasingly those cyber insurers are, they're going to take a hard look at what people are putting on those applications. And if they're saying, hey, we can get back up within, 0 to 4 hours, worst case scenario, I mean, that's fast. That's the speed of heat. And I don't think a lot of, firms have really kind of gone through that process or actually sat down and thought about, okay, how long would this realistically take, worst case scenario? So you really want to be judicious there and try and avoid some sort of material misrepresentation in the application so that the insurance company doesn't come back at you. Likewise, if you're the MSP, you really need to kind of understand and set those expectations for your clients because, as far as they know, they're like, oh, well, I have Carbonite and I just click a button and everything magically reappears. And it's like, no, it's definitely not that simple. It's not that straightforward. There's a lot more to it. It's probably a lot more technical, I think, than a lot of people realize just on the client side because, they're hiring us to do that type of stuff for them. So, making sure that everybody kind of understands what those expectations are. And especially for the MSP, they need to make sure their clients understand what that expectation is. So they're going to advise them on that risk appropriately. And so that way the MSP, they're not going to face some sort of claim on the back end when, a company is suddenly shocked that it may take a couple days to get all that data back up and operating, back up to where they were before. And now you're looking at, say, some massive potential business interruption cost that could then be pushed on the MSP. So I think it's useful for everybody to have that plan, really make sure their clients actually understand, okay, what goes into this, how to plan for that appropriately, any sort of contingency actions there. So everybody's playing on the same field and everybody really understands that it's not point and click. This isn't the year 3000 yet.
Exactly. That's good stuff. Yeah. I always say communication is key. So if you tell your customer you can have them up and running in 24 hours and it takes 3 days, they're going to be super upset with you. If you tell them in advance it's going to take 3 days and it takes 3 days, they're going to be impressed.
Yeah. And if you say 4 days and it's 3 days, then
suddenly
they love you. You're a hero. Yeah.
All right. Thanks.
All right. So I'm just going to kind of presume here that everybody understands what the NIST framework is because we're all technically minded people. Really kind of what I wanted to point out here was there's probably a couple things about NIST CSF that a lot of MSPs don't really know about. And I think that if they did know about, they'd probably push it a lot harder. So really the first thing is that, NIST CSF is kind of like the gold standard for better or worse that all the government and regulatory agencies are going to be using. So if you have a client out there and they are under some sort of regulatory or statutory regime, so that could be, FTC safeguards, with reasonable cybersecurity standards, that could be HIPAA, for example, as well as some of the reasonable cybersecurity states. If something goes wrong and your client is going to face some sort of regulatory inquiry for that, 99 times out of 100, that government regulator is going to be looking at NIST CSF and they're going to be comparing the controls that business has in place to NIST CSF. So outside of all the interesting kind of bells and whistles that go with NIST CSF and why I'm a huge proponent of it, it's also just a very practical way of talking to your clients, right? Both on the potential regulatory side, as well as I think it's underutilized just because, you have that standard framework there. And you can go in and you can actually talk to that customer, that client, and say, maybe they're not the most technically minded, but you can say, okay, we have this, we don't have this, right? This is up, this is down. This is in the works, that's a sideways. So kind of in conjunction with that risk analysis, actually determining, laying out with that client, okay, these are the next steps we think would be a good idea for you, right? And whether they take that or not, that's ultimately their prerogative, but looking at that risk management aspect on the MSP and at least trying to offer some additional service and really kind of help that client who maybe they're really good at what they do, but when it comes to technology, they're just lost in the sauce. Just having that kind of standard thing that they can look at every quarter, you can show progress. That's also going to be a big deal now that the regulators are heating up, states are looking for funding, right? We're already seeing that those regulatory investigations are starting to pick up. So, we understand that something bad will eventually happen to every business, but at least being able to show, hey, we were working off a framework. No, we didn't have every box filled, but here we can show you, right, that say over the years, we have been increasing our security. And so we think you should give us the benefit of the doubt. And that will actually go quite a long ways for a regulator if he comes after you. So those were kind of my interesting little side notes there. John, do you have anything to add?
No, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head and kind of what I wanted to drive home with this NIST cybersecurity framework is at minimum, at its core, it's given you some standard language to have this conversation and to discuss security. And it's building blocks like having that at least kind of primitive is that you can build on that and work with other ideas, because the NIST cybersecurity framework kind of lays down these priorities that, all right, we need to identify our assets. We kind of need to know what is actually in our network. What are we using in our organization? What performs the function of our business at the technical level? And once we've identified that, how do we protect each of those things? If there is evil, if there's badness, if that adversary or that hacker comes along with our assumed compromised mindset, we know that they will. How can we detect that? How can we find that evil? And then how do we respond to that evil? Can we make it go away? Do we do what are our next steps? What do we have in that checklist that we preemptively prepared beforehand? Now, how can we recover after that incident? So I wanted to introduce this again, in case some folks may or may not have heard of this cyber defense matrix. And this is all kudos and credit where credit is due to Sunil Yu. And I think he presented this at one of the RSA conferences recently. But it's this 5x5 matrix now. Like, all right, I have these priorities: identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. But I need to do that across my devices, my applications, the networks that we work with, our data and our users. And originally, the cyber defense matrix, this kind of grid and map, this construct came to life so we could analyze software vendors, security products and tools. And we often kind of swear by, look, there isn't one silver bullet. There is no singular magic wand that will make the bad guys go away. So if you're building out your security stack, if you're kind of developing this and want to make sure it's secure, you can't rely on just one magic, all-powerful tool. So you kind of need to analyze what goes where in my security stack. Does it identify or protect or detect, respond, recover for devices, for applications, for data users, etc.? So I just kind of want to lay out where we fit in that, just to kind of put it on our radar, and so we can continue the conversation. But David, for MSP 360, you're focusing on backups, right?
Yeah, so we're backup services. So we do the file folder as well as full image-based backup, so you can image entire servers if needed. So, and we also have some application support. So we sit there on the protect side at applications and data. And then when it comes to response and recovering, it's really just understanding what needs to be recovered and then actually recovering it. So it's about protecting your customer data and protecting you, the MSP, as a part of that, because any customer out there who's given the option to buy backup services and doesn't, and you agree to secure that customer, which happens, and it's okay because everybody needs to make money. We know that, is at risk of some type of data loss, which can put you at some type of legal risk, or at least bad PR if something happens. So that's kind of where we sit.
And Huntress, I bring this up, and I fully don't intend this to ever be a sales pitch. We're not here to do that. But what Huntress is going to end up doing, and the whole concept behind it, is to hunt, right? Because we have that assume compromise mentality, the hackers are going to leave their footprints. They're going to leave their fingerprints around. There's a smoking gun somewhere if they're in the network. So we hunt for that. We're going to detect that and find that. And we lean kind of more towards that latter end of this cyber defense matrix, because once we see that evil, okay, we'll respond, remediate it, and continue to recover each of those pieces. We're moving into some of the more preventive stuff, kind of the latter end, when we're talking about managed antivirus, getting Windows Defender souped up and working with that smartly across the security platform. But that's kind of where we fit. And Joe, I know you're kind of in the mix here too, right?
Yeah. So, I kind of had to like pause when I was putting my logo in the various boxes there, because, realistically, when we say cyber insurance, like that's not actually an insurance term. It's not even a legal term. Like it's just this idea that people have. So, really kind of like the cyber insurance could be all over the map here, but I really wanted to kind of focus on the recovery side. And the reason I say that is because, as a former IT myself, like, yes, cyber insurance is good. I think everybody should have it, assuming they have the appropriate cyber insurance. But cyber insurance for too long has been kind of like, and we'll dig into this a little bit later, too long has been kind of seen as like the immediate go-to, right? Like, oh, I pay $1,000 for my deductible, and then cyber insurance takes care of the rest. And it's like, no, those days are changing. We'll talk about that a little bit later here. But really, cyber insurance should be seen, and increasingly will be seen, as kind of like the reserve parachute, right? Like you wouldn't just jump out of a plane. And so I really think that defense in depth, that's really kind of number one. Cyber insurance, specifically the recovery side, you don't want to talk to me more than once a year. It's kind of where I'm getting at here, right? And if you talk to me more than once a year, it's probably because something bad has occurred. So you really want to do everything you can to try and avoid something bad happening. So yes, there are a number of elements within the cyber insurance policies, depending on kind of what you get, that really help with that recovery process. But there's also just a ton of things that cyber insurance won't do. And we'll chat about that here in a sec.
Yeah, we kind of got into this thought though, and when we discuss the left hand or the right hand side of the cyber defense matrix, I draw a line here. That kind of big vertical orange line is boom, right? The incident, the disaster, whatever goes wrong. So we talk about pre-boom and post-boom as to when something goes wrong and where do our security tools work in that. You'll notice we put MSP kind of hefty here on that left-hand side for identify. And we realize that's a hope. That's the ideal, like fingers crossed, we hope we have a list and an inventory of what our assets are and know where all the applications are at play, et cetera. We realize that that's not always 1,000% going to be the case, but that is something that we want to get to. We want to get to that point where, hey, an organization knows where our stuff is at. They know everything in our inventory, what's in our asset list, et cetera. But again, just for the conversation of the cyber defense matrix, when we get into that conversation of boom, when we get into the incident, then we get into a little bit more kind of legalese. I guess, Joe, you might do a much better job of explaining the it depends conversation on how we define each thing.
Yeah, definitely. So this is where my master's in cybersecurity law comes into play, because we talk about breaches. It's just kind of this catch-all term that we're using, but that's actually a legal term. And so, I get phone calls from all over the US and people are like, hey, I have this thing going on. Have I been breached?
Joe, did you,
Yeah,
your audio
Joe, we
might have
lost your
died.
sound. Sorry. Thought it maybe it
I was
me.
like checking my headphones, making sure, was that me? But then the chat is like, hey.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're back.
Gotcha.
All
You might
right.
need some insurance for those headphones.
Oh man. So I think it was my microphone. All right, so I'll start back over there. Okay, so there's a big difference between a breach and an event. And one thing I recommend to all my MSP clients is, if someone calls you and they're like, "Oh my God, I've been breached," don't put the word breach in your ticketing system, because it's a legally defined word that has serious implications to it. So when we're talking about a breach, that is, broadly speaking, both access and acquisition of personal information. And even the definition of personal information or protected information, that actually changes depending upon where your client is a resident of, what type of information they hold on their system. But that's kind of a good way to think of it, right? If you're, say, a covered entity or a business associate under HIPAA, they actually have a different actual definition there of what a breach is. And you'll see it's not access and acquisition. It could be access and or acquisition or use or disclosure of PHI or EPHI. So, I think it's important that we kind of just like distinguish that from the get-go. A lot of this could be, we have to wait until the forensics actually comes in, works with the MSP to truly make that legal determination. And I just want a lot of MSPs to be aware that, before you say something is a breach or it's not when you're speaking to your clients, just make sure you understand that there's some legal ramifications there of kind of what can actually be happening. So, as far as cyber insurance is concerned, if we pop over to the next slide here, right? A breach, if we think access and acquisition, just use the broadest terminology there. Hey, bad guy got into your system, he stole a bunch of stuff. That's access and acquisition. You also have events, which, for better or worse, cyber insurance has been trying to throw everything in the kitchen sink on those policies. So an event is something that's not necessarily a breach, right? So that could be like a crypto jacking event. That could be some sort of utility fraud. That could be like a social engineering or wire fraud scam. So they abscond with some amount of money. It could also just be, an event could be, hey, someone's username and password showed up on the dark web, and then we shut that down, right? So that could also be an example of an event for you there. So, just kind of understanding where cyber insurance plays into that and kind of how I think MSP should think about that moving forward. And then briefly just wanted to chat here about, okay, what does cyber insurance actually do? And the short answer is it depends, and it depends greatly on the policy. But these are kind of some of the things that actually go into if a breach or an event occurs, generally what that kind of the fundamentals of a cyber policy would actually play into. So you're going to have a 24-hour hotline there. If you're an MSP, you're already probably well above and beyond any of the knowledge that you're going to get on that 24-hour hotline. So that's going to be, it's really kind of built for, hey, all of my files have this weird extension on them now, and it just keeps, I can see it moving through my file system. And the guy on the other end just said, hey, just turn the whole thing off, right? That's about as far as you get with the 24-hour hotline. So that's not super useful. What is actually more useful is, first, you're going to be assigned an attorney, right? That's going to be your counsel. They should be well-versed in cybersecurity law and all of the various, 50 different state and territory breach notification laws. They're going to help guide that process moving forward, right? So they're kind of like the central hub in all of this. And we spoke earlier about making sure you have a plan before something happens, right? Assuming, as John said, like you have to assume that bad things are going to happen eventually. So one of the things I see that's just a constant mistake, no matter how loud I scream from the mountaintops, is that, businesses just assume, oh, well, John's just going to take care of it, right? But you really need to kind of define those roles, go through some sort of tabletop exercise, figure out, okay, what are the bad things can happen to us? Who's the guy that talks to the attorney? Who's the guy that talks to public relations or crisis management, right? Who's going to be the guy that's working with the attorney to speak to the various law enforcement organizations or officers that are out there, right? And that's very, very important to keep that process smooth so that everybody understands roles are defined, or otherwise you get a lot of bickering. I get phone calls from warring partners at clients, and it just turns into a nightmare there. The forensics itself, that's really going to determine the scope and nature of the breach, and that's going to be important for any sort of potential follow-on that's associated. So do we actually need breach notification, credit monitoring, et cetera? It depends. As a matter of fact, you could have two people from different states, the same type of information gets stolen. One gets a breach notification letter, the other doesn't qualify for a breach notification letter. So it is a very technical, constantly moving process. And hopefully, the forensics and the cyber law attorney, they're going to assist you with that. Next is going to be crisis management, public relations. That's pretty straightforward. Breach notification, credit monitoring, and then the potential for any regulatory fines and penalties. So, with that, there's a business interruption reimbursement component to that. There are limitations on that. And obviously, once again, the faster you get up and running, the smoother the process is going to be, the less stress that's going to be put on your business, the less angry those clients are going to be, as well as, lessening the potential for that regulatory fine and penalty. And if you do have that, we talked about it earlier, having some sort of framework. I personally love NIST-CSF. That will go greatly towards communication, and your attorney will absolutely love you for that. Before we talk about the limits of cyber insurance, kind of one thing I think everybody should be aware of. Oh wait, no, I'm sorry, that's a little bit later on. Let's talk about the limits of cyber insurance. And a lot of these topics I've actually made videos on that are on my YouTube channel to really kind of like hit this from every angle. But I blame my industry for over-promising and under-delivering, right? Cyber insurance, there's a whole lot of bells and whistles on it. The problem with cyber insurance brokers kind of as a whole, there's a few exceptions out there. They don't really understand, potentially some of the legal limitations that cyber insurance has. So for example, a cyber insurance policy could actually pay the ransom for you. So that's good news. The bad news is it can't always do that. And there are strict legal limits on if you can actually pay someone who is listed as, say, like a state sponsor of terrorism, right? If that particular strain of malware comes out of that nation state, yeah, you can appeal that to OFAC, the Department of the Treasury, but unless you're a monster business, they're not going to pay you the time of day. And they actually even put in their notice that you can just presume from the outset that you will not get any sort of leniency there. So there very well could be times where a business gets hit with ransomware, they have cyber insurance that would pay the ransom, and then the government's going to say, thou shalt not do this. Hence why doing the basics, like making sure your backups are in place, super important that you actually get that done.
Joe, that's just like homeowners insurance. If anybody actually sits down and reads their policies, they'll see that if a missile hits your house because of a war, you're not covered at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, same with, I don't think I put it in this slide, but acts of war, right? So if you go back to like the NotPetya virus, there's currently a case, Mondelez v. Zurich, that's $100 million insurance policy. And the insurance industry said, hey, this type of activity, we're going to say that this is an act of digital war, as it were. And so we're not going to pay, and that has to get litigated out. The same thing could potentially occur with SolarWinds, right? They're attributing this to a nation state. And so if you potentially are part of that SolarWinds fallout, we're going to see how that plays out. Unfortunately, probably over the next few months or years, there's a possibility there that cyber insurance won't respond to that. So make sure that everyone's really aware of kind of what those limits are. Same with regulatory fines and penalties. I tell people that's where insurable by law. So you can get a copy of my book later on in the presentation. I go a lot into the regulatory side, right? Because if a regulator says thou shalt be doing this and you're not doing it, I study this stuff all day, every day, 7 days a week. I cannot tell you under what states, under what laws, those regulatory fines and penalties are actually insurable or not. And I think that really changes the conversation when it comes to cybersecurity controls for MSPs, when it's, okay, you could be looking at, say, 6-7 figure fines, and we don't know if those are insurable or not. And so maybe now those additional controls and that additional funding actually starts to make sense. Same with, ongoing compliance costs. You get those 20-year consent orders. Those are absolutely brutal. Long-term damage to your brand identity. I was under the assumption previously that, there was kind of this like breach fatigue where someone got a breach notification letter and they're like, great, this is like the third one I got this year, like nobody cares anymore. That's actually not true. So that was just kind of tribal knowledge, I like to call it. But if you actually go back and you actually look at the statistics of abnormal client churn, you'll actually see we're in an upswing again. So, businesses and clients in particular, like they're taking it a lot more seriously now, and they're increasingly leaving industries that have been breached, or those businesses that have been breached. And then of course, loss of future customers. That's something we can't even measure. But I can tell you on a number of occasions, you go, like some businesses have been breached, right? I do a quick internet search. The first term or the first hit that's going to pop up, right? If I wanted directions to that business, that's where I go. That's their website. 2 through 10 on the rest of the page, that's terrible news articles that have come out that business has been breached. And so, yeah, there is a potential in a cyber insurance policy for something called reputational harm, right? Generally, that's only for 6 months, and there are strict limitations to that. You also have to evidence that loss. And to do that, you have to go back to, say, the previous year's income. Well, if your business has been growing, there's that delta there you're just not going to get anyways. And so don't just think, hey, cyber insurance has all this stuff, I'm good to go. It's not that simple. And I'll get off my soapbox there.
Got one more soapbox.
All right.
Get back on.
Where is cyber insurance actually headed in 2021? The whole market's in turmoil. There's a number of reasons for this. One is just going to be COVID in particular. So, insurance companies don't exist in a vacuum. Generally, the cyber insurers out there, they're doing other lines of insurance as well. So if we're just talking about business interruption reimbursement for all of, say, the hospitality industry in the world, I mean, you're talking hundreds of billions of dollars of losses. And so, you tack that in with, say, SolarWinds, where now they're looking at billions of dollars, and we don't really know how that's going to play out. Put on top of that breaches are just increasing, right? Everybody going to remote work. We've got ransomware just knocking at everybody's door. The cost to deal with this is increasing because you have so many people working remotely. It just makes it a lot more difficult. So cyber insurance actually is becoming much more expensive. A lot of the venture capital money that's supposedly on the sidelines isn't jumping in. And so what we can actually see moving forward, and I think this is actually good news, honestly, is that we're going to be seeing the cyber insurance industry, I think, actually driving a lot of cybersecurity moving forward. And that's because they're going to start just mandating reasonable cybersecurity controls. And I put that in quotes because that's a legal term. But really, if you don't have the fundamentals down, right, like backups, email security, 2FA, MFA, threat detection, dark web monitoring, et cetera, security awareness training, if you're just not doing the basics right, they're not even looking at you, quite frankly. And I'm already seeing that happening, right? So if someone says, no, we're not doing security awareness training, and they're transferring $100,000 a week, no underwriter, no insurance company is going to jump on that risk. So a lot of these just like basic kind of foundational cybersecurity controls that I think a lot of businesses have been hesitant to adopt, I think they're just going to have to do it anyways, or they're going to have a really hard time getting any cyber insurance. Next, we're going to see that those premiums and those retentions / deductibles, those are starting to rise. And so previously, everybody was jumping in the market. This was like the hot thing to do, where the insurance industry thought they were going to make a lot of cash. And then they lost their shorts on it. And cyber insurance premiums have been deflated for a long time anyways. They're finally starting to increase, as are those retentions. So that means previously, a company could say, hey, I got $1,000 on my retention, and it's not a big deal. If something happens, I pay $1,000, and we're back to business. That is going away. Now we're looking at $5,000, $10,000 minimum retentions, and suddenly, going back to those reasonable cybersecurity controls, suddenly that looks like a much better investment, right? So, obviously starting with the foundational, moving forward into the more complex stuff, that's going to be really quite actually good news for society as a whole. And then moving forward, we're already seeing certain classes of business, those that hold, like say, lots of PHI, for all the MSPs out there, right? Like those small dental offices that have a ton of PHI and tend not to spend so much on the cybersecurity, that's getting much more difficult. So to put that in perspective, I have a brand new client. They're about $1 million or so dental office out west from me. And before they had a breach, easily it would have been like $1,000 cyber policy with $1 million limit. Following that breach, when they actually came to me, the first quote I got back was actually about $7,600. So we're seeing a huge ramp up. And oh, by the way, in that application, they were looking very closely at what type of controls they put in place to try and avoid a similar event moving forward. So even the questions that underwriters are asking, not that they actually know what it means, but they're asking very technical questions now. So that's coming from on high. And then we're seeing, certain policy elements are just being completely removed. So very large businesses, they're just having a hard time even getting coverage for ransomware at this point. Or if they do, I mean, they're capping how much the insurance company is going to be on the hook for. So all of that, I think, moving forward is actually really good news. Talking to MSPs, you've got ammunition or more ammunition now to talk to your clients to make sure that they're taking cybersecurity seriously. And then ultimately, it just keeps all of our lives a lot safer, right? Now that these businesses, before they could just put it in the corner, not worry about it, not care. Now it's going to be people like me telling them, no, you have to do this, or we can't even put this out into the market. There's nothing you're going to be able to do unless you want to spend an obscene amount of money, which is probably not a good idea.
So 2 questions for you, Joe, that I've been kind of watching the chat. If you're working with the customer, say on the insurance side, a dental office that's being managed by an MSP, at what point is the MSP will be looped in to discuss the security side? Obviously, there probably is not a lot of IT support within the dental office itself, which is why many of them get IT services, right? So can MSPs expect that they're going to be brought into those conversations more, or be asked by insurance companies on behalf of their clients to provide documentation that details exactly what they're doing, so the insurance company can have some assurance that they're a good risk?
Yeah, so that's a great question. There's both a risk and reward to that. So, what I like to do is actually get on the phone or get on a video conference with the MSP, talking to their client about cyber insurance, going through the 108 questions I have to really kind of drill down what those risks are. Most guys aren't going to do that. So what we're seeing is companies they're like, hey, here's my cyber app, MSP, fill this out. Be careful of the liability that you are assuming as an MSP by doing that, because that could come really back to bite you. That's the downside. I think the upside there is that's a really great opportunity. If they're just dealing with a broker, an insurance guy who's like, yeah, just send me the app and whatever, that's actually a really great opportunity if the MSP is standing alone to actually talk with their client of theirs and say, hey, maybe we need to look at what this insurance company is asking for. Kind of like the initial applications could still be pretty short, but the follow-on applications are going to be much more extensive. So they could actually sit down and they could say, hey, we're checking no to a lot of boxes here. Maybe we need to think that, like, if the insurance company is asking about this actually really could be a good idea. So I think there's both the risk and reward there. And I would just add.
So another talk to your lawyer answer.
Yeah, well, it's, don't fall into the trap of an MSP of saying, hey, I need to make this guy look good to the insurance company. That will burn you. The name of the game is you got to put all the cards on the table. And if your client doesn't like an answer that you put on that application, that is on the actual client of the MSP, right, with the MSP to try and remediate whatever that particular question is. And also,
so it probably also brings up having good things like master service agreements in place with your customers to make sure your liability is limited and things like that.
Precisely.
Part of that.
Yeah. And actually contractually requiring your clients to carry cyber insurance. That's another really good idea that I won't delve in too much here, but I made a video on it. But as the MSP, if you ever have questions, or we're technical people here, so sometimes you go to answer a question and it's a yes or no box, and you're like, it's a maybe, right? Or a kinda, or a sometimes, or it's situational. There's nothing to say that you as an MSP can't work with that client. Just create a narrative for that question. Just put all the cards on the table. And the idea for that is now you're not creating a material misrepresentation. You're putting the onus back on the underwriter to ask a follow-on question if they don't understand what's going on, right? 99 times out of 100, they're not going to ask questions because they don't know what questions to ask. But nonetheless, if there's ever a question, right, following some type of breach or event, and they go and they look at that question, you put all the cards on the table. They didn't ask you anything further about that.
Okay, that's good.
And David, I will let you jump this off, and then I will add.
Yeah, I'll do the communication. I just wanted to, I'm going to ask you one question that I'm hoping you can answer later. I want to be mindful of the time. So we've had a few people ask about cyber insurance as it relates to, let's just assume data in another country. Maybe a US company is conducting business in Germany and maybe they're using some German servers over there, how that is handled from the insurance side. I'll let you think about that while we finish up, and maybe you can get to that later on. I think I'll probably spend less time on this slide than I probably had planned. The punchline is talk to your lawyer, right? Because we really don't know exactly whether it's an event or a breach, as Joe was talking about, what needs to be communicated, at what level, how much information needs to get out there. You may be bound by certain compliance standards like, HIPAA breach notification rules, or some new California civil codes that are out there that talk about communication, or, rules and regs that probably exist in, 49 other states and the District of Columbia. So you're going to have to talk to your legal team about what happened and whether or not you need to notify. And not only that, how you need to notify. So why? Because you might be required to do so legally. How and when is going to really be determined from your legal assistants. And, I just think of lawyers as another thing that you're going to have, retained in case something like this happens. You never want to be in a situation where something major happens and you have to start hunting for lawyers. So try to find a law firm that can help you, that you can, have a hotline to and call them up just like your insurance people and get this stuff addressed. So Joe, I don't know if you want to say anything about communication. I think you probably covered a lot of it, but if there's something else you want to add, that would be great.
Yeah. So
you're good.
Okay. So, your question there about data that could be, housed in other countries, that actually gets into cross-border transfer mechanisms, which is in my book. Links at the end of the presentation here. People can get that for free. So now we're talking about, following, SHRMS too, but EU-US Privacy Shield, which is still technically enforced here, APAC, et cetera, et cetera. Generally, the insurance company isn't really going to care, quite frankly, as long as that's disclosed on the application and you have worldwide coverage. So that really shouldn't necessarily be a super big deal. The other thing I kind of wanted to touch on here is actually talking about Msp responsibility. So if something happens at your client, whether it's directly your fault or not, you need to start thinking, is that a potential claim for your own insurance under Tech E&O, which is a longer discussion, but I'll leave it at that. But then also actually understanding kind of what your obligation is as an MSP. Not that I'm giving legal advice, but if you actually look at the 50 different state and territory breach notification laws, the gist of it is an MSP is a data holder, not a data owner. And even a lot of attorneys that I talk to actually don't understand this distinction. So if your client's data gets breached and you're an MSP, it's not directly on you to actually pay for breach notification, credit monitoring, et cetera. even if your client thinks that's how it's supposed to operate, because they just assume that that's fair somehow. There's a lot of reasons for why that particular distinction exists, but I think that's another good reason why MSPs need to think about contractually obligating their clients to carry cyber insurance, right? Because the last thing you want is them looking at your insurance policy as opposed to them looking at their cyber insurer to try and make them whole again. So I think that's a very useful distinction. I think it's something that more MSPs, I understand it's not a comfortable conversation. I made a whole video about kind of why this is the case to help MSPs actually communicate that to their clients, but they can go and reference that. But I think it's a discussion that actually needs to be had so that all the cards are on the table, people actually understand what their roles and responsibilities are following a breach or some type of event.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Joe.
I will try and wrap this up because I'm cognizant of the time and we have a lot of awesome questions. And I think the Q&A segment is something that we really want to zoom into. So I hope, anyway, what we've been able to do with this kind of webinar show for everyone is hopefully kind of gone full circle around a disaster or an incident, talking about pre-boom, post-boom, cyber insurance, preemptive preparations, et cetera. So the question and kind of what we want to leave off with is, yes, we have this assumed compromise mentality. We are doing our due diligence before the badness happens. At least we're saying that, but how do we do it? What does it actually entail? What does it take? And I'm really happy with what everyone else has kind of said so far. I mean, Joe had sprinkled it in, like it boils down to the basics. All that we can do is like, let's have people dedicated to this sort of thing. Like, security can't be an afterthought anymore. We know that it is, but we have to have folks that are fully dedicated and purposed for keeping our organization, our business actually secure. And we have to be actively looking for those threats, those vulnerabilities, those exploits. And the kind of tried and tested security posture of like, all right, hey, Patch Tuesday is coming up. We should make sure that we're updating. We should be supplying those hot fixes, et cetera. That's got to be a constant heartbeat, et cetera. That's how I think the best way we can do is getting those bare bone basics actually put in place. So then we can get to the real stuff. We talk about defense in depth. Again, I remember Joe kind of sprinkled it in. And you've heard me say, and we say it all the time, is that there isn't a single silver bullet. There is no one magic wand that will stop all the badness. We have to have layered security. And I tend to really like this analogy of a little submarine. I guess our nautical nerds here. If water punctures that submarine and if it starts to flood, well, all the rooms and all those compartments are built out of watertight bulkheads, right? So if it floods one compartment, that's not going to carry on and make damage to the whole rest of the vessel. It's contained and encapsulated in there because we have security, because we have layers in place that stops that. It contains and limits it. It restrains the damage. I think we have to kind of have that same mentality when we've got our AV, we've got our EDR, we've got our DNS filtering, we've got et cetera, layered security. You can't rely on just one hope, fingers crossed, pretend we're secure. That's really the thought. And I think we can move into questions with the last
let's do
5
that.
minutes here.
I've seen some good questions. Let me ask you, Joe, does the insurance industry in the United States publish something related to cyber insurance with respect to the procedures, policies that companies will need to have in place? You know, you showed something earlier with backup and security software, like the minimal, like the checklist of what you'll need to do if you want to apply for insurance. That way, if somebody applies, they don't have to worry about, an underwriter saying, no can do, your backups are, only being stored on site and whatever, or you're not using the right type of encryption, or you don't have 2FA on a certain app. Is there anything they can do to reference?
No, there's no strict guidelines just because there's so much variance in the market. But I think the businesses should just assume that kind of all the basics that we all know exist out there. that's just kind of needs to be standard moving forward, quite frankly. So, as you said, right, like, 2FA, MFA, understanding what's on their system, where is it located, dark web monitoring, having appropriate backups, some sort of like, threat detection response is definitely good. So just making sure they have at least the fundamentals in place, that's going to go a really long way. And then once they have the fundamentals in place, then we can start talking about like the cool fancy stuff, which I love to talk about, but so many people they mess up the basics that I end up talking about basics 99% of the time. So yeah, just making sure that they have the basics in place, I think is going to go a super long way.
Okay. So what I will say is that many of you are in the MSP community, and I was going to just mention this on a previous slide. There are some great MSP communities out there, on Facebook, on Reddit, everywhere. And collectively, you all know a lot. And I know the MSP community likes to share with one another. So if you have questions about this kind of stuff and you want to solicit, information from those that maybe or have already purchased cyber insurance, hit up those communities and see what kind of answers you get. Yeah, there'll be that occasional snide response from somebody who takes issue with how you spelled something, but we can't avoid that. But there's a lot of great information out there, so seek it and get it. I don't know that any of us, there's a question about dark web monitoring. There are products out there. I can't speak for, Huntress or, CPL, but, we don't specifically recommend any particular products for that. We're not in that space ourselves, but that's a great question for the MSP community. So throw that in chat and ask your fellow attendees what they're using. I bet you'll get a pretty good idea.
Yeah, I would just briefly add on the whole dark web monitoring thing. One thing we actually kind of didn't really get into here dealt with risk of harm analysis and safe harbor rules. So I know we're running short on time, so I'm not going to delve super deep into that, but I think that's actually a
10-second definition on what safe harbor means.
Yeah, so essentially, if like risk analysis, risk of harm analysis, safe harbor, right? If you could prove that there's a reasonable legal term belief that nothing bad will occur from what happened, then you don't have to end up calling people like me. And I think that's super useful and it's underrated. And I've meant to make a video on this, but kids, if it's as simple as, hey, like having this dark web monitoring showing like, hey, this username and password was for sale for like 5 minutes. We shut it down, changed the password, looked at the logs, everything seems fine. That could literally save you like 5 to 10 grand and a ton of heartache when you end up having to call someone like me more than once a year. And then we have to call in the cavalry to prove the same point. So I think it's highly underrated that people actually adopt that.
Okay, great. I know people were asking about recordings and links to stuff. So we are going to follow up with everyone. You'll get a link to the recording if you want to share it or watch it because you missed part of it or you just loved it so much you got to see it again. John, I'll just turn it over to you. Why don't you call out anything you want them to know about Huntress?
Yeah, absolutely. If anyone is interested in Huntress or just kind of wants to learn a little bit more about the product or just have a conversation, because we like to do this kind of thing. We like to nerd out and have these conversations and discussions about security. You can reach out, hello@huntress.com. We do a monthly show talking about kind of the adversary and hacking. Just the mindset behind the adversary is Tradecraft Tuesday, when we kind of dive into real, actual like offensive techniques, and that kind of puts us in the head of, okay, how can we better defend against what we know is the evil out there? And if you're interested, there is a 21-day free trial you can find online at huntress.com. But that is the whole spiel. And if you're interested, we can chat more offline.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sean. Same with us with MSP 360. You can hit up msp360.com and read about more our solution, hit up that contact email address or, request some information on site. And we've been more than happy to demo products and speak to you more about what you need. And Joe?
Yeah, if you want to reach out, cplbrokers.com, that's my business. You can also download my latest book for free, Damage Control, Cyber Insurance Compliance. I think that's a great tool for MSPs. Not only just to send out their clients in terms of the CYA aspect, but actually have a good conversation to learn the fundamentals about, hey, you could fall under this particular regulatory or statutory regime. These are kind of like the baseline things you have to do. And if you don't, here's the bad things that are going to happen to you. Also on YouTube, so they can reach out. I try to put out at least a video a week on cyber insurance, cybersecurity law type stuff. And that is about it for me.
All right, so I want to wrap up and thank everybody for coming. We had a great turnout. I think it was a great webinar. I hope everybody got something out of it. I certainly did. I hope you did too. We hope to see you next time we do this. Might be sooner rather than later, because I think this was a success. So thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day or evening if you're over in Europe.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.